leensa kuma. Tokuma. Lafti tenna leensa kuma. Kanaga afati rafi saku lafti nagaha saku lafti kabana saku bienta haba tokuma lafti tenna leensa kuma. Tokuma lafti tenna leensa kuma. Afu ele lanka gare faifu daji jobare nuamo warika dese tenada kajel tulawi saku lafti nagaha saku lafti kabana saku bienta haba tokuma lafti tenna leensa kuma. Tokuma lafti tenna leensa kuma.
Hello, welcome to Level Broadcasting Corporation. My name is Milko Badasso, and I will be your host for the day. I will be discussing the current climate of Ethiopia. We are joined by a panel of 3 guests, Professor Abbas Namo, Professor Mohammed Tahiro, and Dr. Hussein Hamda, and you're all welcome to WBC. Thank you for tuning in. So we'll just jump right in with the first question. So I'll pose this to you, Professor Abbas. Months after declaring victory in Tigray and calling the Tigray People's Liberation Front crushed and blown with the wind, reports coming out of Tigray are painting a different picture. This week, Prime Minister Abiy's government declared the TPLF and OLF shunning terrorist organizations. What do you make of these apparent contradictions? And a second part to that question is also Abiy's policies. How have they contributed to marginalization and isolation of Ethiopia in Africa at the moment, to the point where most of its neighbors are claiming Ethiopia's water and land, etc.?
Thank you, Milko, for having us. I'm pleased to see you and also to be with our friends, Professor Mohammed and Dr. Hussein. So as we got the opportunity to discuss this war, I think long time ago, this war was designed and executed by 3 forces: the Amhara, the Tigrayan, the Amhara, and of course the Eritreans and Abiy government. So the war was supposed to last few weeks, few days. It is not coming to an end, although Abiy government declared the war would end very shortly, and even once he promised us it will come to an end in few days. And also he said that the Ethiopian forces entered Mekelle without any kind of casualties. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. The war is ongoing, and many people have been displaced. About 2 million people have been displaced. 4.2 million people also are dependent on foreign aid. And also the country is suffering practically from everything. So there are many humanitarian abuses, human rights abuses, and of course the Abiy government is accused of war crime and crime against humanity. So Abiy simply has been asking now to withdraw Eritrean soldiers, which he initially denied their presence. And unfortunately also he doesn't have any way of taking out these soldiers because he is totally dependent on Tigrayan forces, on Eritrean forces to keep peace. Secondly, also, he is now being pressured by the international community, of course, to open up negotiations with the Tigrayans. Because the war is not winnable. It was known for everybody that this war cannot be won by force. It became a guerrilla warfare, and the Tigrayans are now gathering momentum to the point where they are even attacking the Amhara territory. So what is happening now, the Western governments are trying to push the big government to make concessions, to make peace, to end this war without any kind of delay. So Abiy is simply in trouble. And the second thing also, I think Abiy is also facing another kind of challenge from unexpected sources, the Amhara. Who used to support, who helped him to go to war, are now turning against him because they feel that this war cannot be won and Abiy is not doing what they do. And therefore, he is naturally accused of war crime even by the Amharas. So what is happening is now Abiy tries to find a way of pleasing the Amhara. I think one way of pleasing the Amhara was to simply characterize TPLF as terrorist organization, and also the Shane group. Also, no one knows what Shane does mean. Really, no one really knows. No group simply showing up by saying it is Shane. So he wanted to simply please the Amharas because they were demonstrating against, of course, the killings of Amhara, as they say it, and also they wanted to simply protest against the Tigrayans. So this doesn't make any sense at all, because after waging wars for 6 months, what is the purpose of calling the Tigrayans now terrorists? After fighting for 2 or 3 years against what they call Shane, why is it now they call them terrorists? So this is simply a futile exercise, which doesn't make much sense, because characterizing someone is also already a very controversial one, because one is terrorist is simply another is hero or martyr. I think that is the definition. When you call someone a terrorist in Tigray now, the one who simply is considered to be a terrorist is simply a martyr, defending his village, defending his family. The same thing, I think, for those people who simply fight against Abiy government for human rights. So this simply designation doesn't make sense at all. It's simply contrary to the effect. So that's why I think this is simply a desperate move on the part of Abiy government to use the term terrorism. On the contrary, I think one can argue that the Abiy government is also a terrorist state. This is what we call state terrorism. The Abiy government is, of course, waging wars against innocent people, extrajudicial killings, arresting people without reason. So the one who abuses human rights, killing innocent people is simply as Abiy government. I think the last information I think we had, I think you must have heard the incident of a teacher of Dambidolo who simply left Arba Minch to visit his family and his wife of 9 months pregnant, and he was immediately killed without any reason. So Abiy is simply committing terrorist acts, while of course he is accusing others, of course, of terrorism. So I think this is simply doesn't make much sense in a true meaning of the term. But Abiy government is trying to make what they call appease Amhara public opinion by simply accusing others. Otherwise, I think this war is becoming more complicated and more complex. The second, I think, each part of the question you are asking is simply, Abiy is simply losing friends everywhere. I know he is isolated internationally. He is condemned by the United States. He is also accused by Western European Union for not listening to their advice, not to go to this war. The same thing, of course, African governments are not happy. Abiy government ignored the call of African Union to find peaceful solution to this conflict. You see, now he is regretting. I'm sure that he's regretting because he will be forced now, after too late, after 6 months, to come to the same kind of situation. On the other hand, also, I think Abiy simply made many enemies for no reasons, and he is in conflict with apparently with Kenya, who apparently is not happy about Turkana Lake because they are also now claiming Turkana. The dam on Turkana Lake, of course, deprived Turkana from the nomad population from water. Even Djibouti is now claiming the Awash River. To your surprise, of course, Somalia also claiming the Awash River. So that means Ethiopia is disrespected more than any time in the past. One thing also which is happening by allying with Abiy, with Isaias, he simply undone the old alliances with Uganda. Now Uganda is apparently with Egypt. Even Southern Sudan is with Sudan, and he is left only with Eritrea, of course, and democratic government who never organized any elections for the last 30 years. So what it means is that Ethiopian image is simply tarnished more than ever before. I think if you study history, all Ethiopian rulers, also autocrats domestically, they have good reputation internationally. I saw many of Milik's letters. I know also Haile Selassie's letters who had really good reputation. Even Mengistu had good friend relationship with socialist government. So when you look at, of course, the Ethiopian image is mostly tarnished, and he seems to be in bad shape. And especially when you look at the conflict they are having on Grand Ethiopian um, Dam, I didn't see anyone sympathizing with Ethiopia. I think that is the kind of situation we are seeing. I think I have to stop here. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Dr. Hussein, I pose the same question to you. What do you make of the shift in narrative and claiming these organizations and governments such as TPLF are terrorist organizations and the policies that have contributed to the isolation of the neighbors and claiming territories?
Thank you, Milko, for inviting us. Yeah, I think the question is well addressed by Professor Abbas. I just wanted to add a few things. Declaring the two organizations, TPLF and what they call Shane, as terrorist organization, in a nutshell, is what we can say the return of the vicious circle. What that means is, in the past, Ethiopian governments, they do this kind of, declarations which are useless, in terms of its feasibility and sustainability, by, criminalizing normal dissent for groups with, who don't relate to their policies, who don't agree with their policies. And, TPLF has done many declarations like this in the past. When it comes to TPLF, I think the Derg had done the same to them. When they came to power, the TPLF also did to OLF. And now they are getting that from their own, offsprings. The Shane, I think, I don't know how this is going to be implemented. The OLA, the Oromo Liberation Army, clarified its position, its name. It's not Shane. There's no organization called Shane registered legally anywhere in the world. It is a name given to probably resistance, movement by the Abiy government. When if they wanted to use this excuse to arrest people who they have been already arresting, when they take them to the court, this declaration is not legally defensible. Why? Because if somebody is accused of relating to Shane group, then the first thing that the court has to ask is, what is this Shane group? Where is it registered? Who is its leader? Who are members? What did it do? And all of these legal questions, are not defensible. And I think by just, declaring something, you have to test first the legal defensibility of the declaration. And I don't think, the Abiy government, the Council of Ministers considered that. I think they just took a harsh step, to probably, scare dissent of any kind. But this is like a desperation act. It doesn't bring any peaceful resolution. You can use any excuses to arrest, detain, jail people. They have been doing this. The case in point where Professor Bass mentioned earlier, a civilian who visited his family member was taken away and killed. And that's extrajudicial killing. And that didn't happen because of, declaration of these organizations as terrorists. It looks like the terrorist is the government itself. And Abiy himself, admitted publicly that the Ethiopian government, all the security forces are acting out of the rule of law. And so I think it's a futile exercise. It is the return of the vicious circle, as I said. It doesn't take the country, to a better position. Your second question, the contribution of Abiy's policy towards the isolation of Ethiopia in Africa and internationally. I think more than what it is, I think what Abiy did, especially in all his speeches, in the parliament and elsewhere, he appeared weak and weaker and weaker from time to time. His party seems to be disenfranchised. On a public space, when things, there are something that as a public office, confidentiality and security information need to be maintained. We know how governments work. We work in government, and even in a mature democracy, there is cabinet confidentiality and so on. But when it comes to public speech, it looks like he spills the beans. What that means is any information that needs to be kept within government, within the military, within the the security apparatus, seems to be spilled for, let's say, if there is real enemy, to use that information to against the country. Case in point, before the war, started in Tigray, Abiy took the Eritrean government, Isaias Afwerki to Debrecen and other places, showed him all the military apparatus, the military, equipments and so on. And later on, he fell, prey to that. So now, like Professor Abbas said earlier, Eritrean government has now supremacy over Ethiopia in terms of, military information and so on. And then the world would watch this, and neighboring countries would observe this. And you never know how this information is also shared among, neighboring countries. And now that's also coming back to bite the Abiy government. So the Abiy government is now, weaker than ever, both theoretically and practically, and that is, causing all neighbors, including very weak ones like Djibouti, to claim Ethiopian waters and land, and not even mention any neighbor who doesn't want to claim any land, or any territory in Ethiopia. And so that policy significantly contributed. And this is what I would like to add. I think Professor Abbas clearly, discussed that question.
Thank you so much. Professor Mohammed as well. Both Dr. Hussein and Professor Abbas have delved a little deeper. I would like to get your take. How has Abiy's policy contributed to the marginalization and isolation of Ethiopia and Africa to the point where its neighbors are claiming excessive territory? And about the narrative regarding these organizations and previous governments such as TPLF being called a terrorist organization. What do you make of these contradictions from the government? Professor Mohammed, I think you are currently muted. If you could unmute.
Okay. Thank you, Milko, for having us. I have identified some conflicting claims by the government. The first claim by Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed when he spoke to the parliament was that they had defeated the TPLF, and the people of Ethiopia were led to believe the only thing that remained to be done was minor police work. Later on, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed in the federal parliament, in a speech he gave to the same parliament, admitted that the government is involved in a very difficult asymmetric warfare against the TPLF. So that kind of neutralizes the first claim that they had destroyed the TPLF. That's one. The second one is recently he claimed that they have completely annihilated the TPLF, and he used a colorful language to describe that. He said they are crushed and belong with the wind. Few days later, again, in a speech he gave to the parliament, not a speech he gave to the parliament, this time they are designating the same organization that they claim has been annihilated, completely destroyed. Now they are branding him, this organization, they're giving it a designation of a terrorist organization. So that's also a conflict. The third one is he has denied involvement of Eritrea in the war in Ethiopia for weeks. But events on the ground and irrefutable video clips coming out of Tigray forced Abiy to admit that Eritrea indeed was involved in the conflict. Now, the bigger question is, why is Abiy Ahmed making these claims that can easily be fact-checked? I have a theory. My theory is Abiy Ahmed was coerced into this war by two groups. One is the Amhara political elite that wanted to destroy an armed proponent of the current federal arrangement. The second one is Isaias Afwerki, who had personal vendetta against the TPLF. They coerced him to take action in Tigray. But Abiy got into this without really thinking through the consequences of his action. He did not think through his exit strategy. He could not foresee there could not possibly be a clean victory in Tigray. And now, with events on the ground confronting Abiy, he is kind of forced to retract, and also with reality on the ground, they are forced to deny events that are really happening. And the reason he is denying these events is because the rest of the country is also a tinderbox. So what happened in Tigray could possibly erupt in other parts of the country. So Abiy is scared. He see that now. He couldn't foresee it before he took action in Tigray. So those are the apparent contradictions of Abiy Ahmed. Now, when it comes to the diplomatic crisis, that the country is isolated both domestically and internationally. Domestically, I mean in the neighborhood, by Sudan, even Djibouti, Kenya, to some extent Somalia, is because you have a prime minister in Ethiopia that cannot be trusted. They have caught him lying many times. The president of Kenya, Uhuru Kenyatta, has said that much. Abiy is not trusted, he lies. Sudan said Abiy told them to occupy Western Gondar and kind of like hold it for them. And then Abiy claimed that Ethiopia was invaded by Sudan. That's also, according to Sudanese officials, a lie. So people don't trust prime ministers whose words cannot be trusted. That's one. The second one is with the wider international community. Abiy Ahmed lied about the involvement of Eritrean troops in in Tigray. He lied to the United Nations, he lied to the US, he lied to the European Union, and now they don't trust him. You have a prime minister in Addis Ababa who cannot be trusted. Trust in diplomacy is very important. If you can't trust a president or a prime minister, then everything he tells you, even though if it's true, people take it as a lie. So Abiy Ahmed has isolated the country, both in the neighborhood and internationally. He cannot be trusted. And we'll talk about the support he lost if the opportunity arises, both domestically and internationally.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that take. And Professor Abbas, I'll go back to you. You mentioned the international community and the calling out of Abiy's entire administration. So the United States and the European Union are publicly calling on the Ethiopian government to seek a peaceful settlement for the conflict in Tigray. Ethiopia's government media surrogates are calling on Abiy to resist the imperialist conspiracy to resurrect TPLF from the dead. So where does Abiy's popularity stand at home based on this fact?
Thank you, Milko. I think one of the most important issues we consider, as we said, this was not winnable. He could not win. He didn't listen to any advice. He went there, and now he's stuck. So what you have is now the international community has also responsibility to protect citizens of outside. You know, historically, I think they try to argue that Ethiopia is a sovereign state. The United Nations, the international community, doesn't have the right to intervene in internal matters. But what he forgot was, of course, international law allows the United Nations, international community to intervene to protect human rights. That's what human security paradigm. So what is happening now, the Abiy government is asking, of course, multiple, numerous reports by CNN, by Amnesty, other humanitarian organizations, about abuses of human rights, about rape, about the people who simply continue to suffer. By the way, gang rape. Thousands of women have been raped. Millions of people have been displaced. Many people wanted to see an end to this conflict. So the only way I think the international community can suggest is, because Abiy cannot win this war, is the only way, of course, a negotiation. Negotiation with who? With TPLF or other Tigrayans. Of course, this is really very, very difficult for Abiy to do and for Eritreans to do, because they put every, every calculation on this to win this war. So they lost. So this is a big loss for Amhara if they come to compromise with the Tigrayans. That means also not only you reinstate some form of autonomous Tigrayan authority, but also they have to abandon the land they are occupying, including Walgait, which is a very significant one. So the second important issue, I think, for Isaias also, he has been asked to withdraw from Eritrea. So withdrawing from Tigray means for him, of course, a big loss, because he counted on this war to expand his influence, as Professor Mohammed just mentioned, and to get access to Ethiopian resources and perhaps to become the king of the Horn of Africa. So he is resisting to really withdraw from Tigray. And Abiy also, the lose in Tigray means he is coming to square one. That means he lost confidence. He lost, of course, the trust of his people, because he promised them, of course, to win the war. So what is happening now, the international community is going to force him to negotiate with the people they hated, they despised, they neglected, of course, now. So I think one of the accusations, of course, the Amhara are naturally trying to resist. One of the funny thing about the Amhara, so using about imperialism, while they themselves, of course, were imperialists back home in Ethiopia. For example, the Oromo do not know another imperialist other than the Amharas. Now they are simply accusing the Western governments, who are just asking, not imposing anything, to find workable solution to the conflict. So the Amhara have simply a lot to lose in this one, because one of the frustration for the Amhara is simply Abiy will become weaker and weaker. So they do not want to see a weaker Abiy, because they would like to see a stronger Abiy, who simply defeats the Tigrayans, and at the same time also who would simply win the majority in the election and who simply also naturally wipe up federal institution or dispensation. So this is not happening. Abiy simply lost credibility by everywhere in the country and internationally. Therefore, you can understand the reason why the Amharas are really protesting, because they have a lot to lose, because they put every effort in this war, because they simply felt the weaker Abiy naturally would allow them to simply come to power. I think this is not happening. So that's very important point to know. But I think now for Abiy, he's now dependent on a party called Azema. Azema is officially asking for the Eritreans, the colonizers, to stay there. So how can Abiy simply accept the presence of Eritrea? Apparently what has been happening so far is Eritreans are naturally dressed or in Ethiopian uniform to stay under the protection of Ethiopians. Apparently he is using them also in Walaga because he is not in a position to simply to defeat what he calls Onekshane, or what Oromo call Wobo. So what is happening is now Abiy simply doesn't have any choice. He has to come to a sort of understanding with Europeans, because the British government, the British Parliament asked for a kind of negotiated settlement. The American new ambassador called Fittelman, Jeffrey Fittelman, is also asking for the same thing. He doesn't want anything else except the withdrawal of the Eritreans and the beginning of negotiations with the Tigrayans. So I think he is simply stuck. He doesn't have any choice. If he says no, then of course these people do not want to intervene militarily, but they can hurt him diplomatically and economically. As we said last time, the Americans are in control of the World Bank. The Americans also give a lot of money, and also the Europeans can hold back their money, their resources. So this country, by the way, Ethiopia, only exports $1.6 billion and receives about $10 billion from outside in different forms. You cannot see Ethiopia surviving Western sanction, Western pressure. So I think we will see what happens. Despite, of course, the claim of the Amhara, the imperialistic pressure, Abiy will be forced to negotiate with the Europeans, with the Americans, with the international community to find a way out of this situation. So I think in any case, he is the loser. He simply, as Dr. Hussein said, he simply comes out of as the weaker more than ever. He lost his prestige. He simply lost his rationality, and he simply is seen as someone who is not reasonably strong to lead a country of 113 million people. So I think he is simply weaker than ever before. I know he was asked, he was begged practically to find workable solution, not to go to this war. He said no at the time, but now this time they will force him to simply sit down and make the necessary compromise.
Thank you so much for your take. And Dr. Hussein, I pose the same question to you. As Professor Abbas stated, there have been countless war crimes committed. The international community has condemned the Ethiopian government for these crimes. What is your take on this? And what is your take on the Ethiopian government's media calling on Abiy to resist the imperialist conspiracy and intervening with the current climate?
Thank you, Milko. I think that question is, I think it has been, discussed many times in the past by, different media outlets on Ethiopia. The pressure from the international community, it shouldn't be a surprise. What's going on in Ethiopia is beyond what even the Abiy government imagined at the beginning. So they started the conflict as a rule of law oppression, when in fact a force in a region which was part of its a coalition was attacked. It wasn't just the TPLF, the group, but the people. So look at now the victims. More than 60 million people, migrated to Sudan as a refugee, and internal displacement are there, and a lot of human rights abuses. Heinous crimes also happened. by sometimes what people call unruly security forces that acted in their own interest and not in the public interest. The warning was there. The warning was there. Don't go in. He was told, don't go into this war. Try to negotiate. Of course, on the other side as well. So the TPLF didn't, were not willing also to negotiate. So they also made a mistake. And the victim, more than any other, is the Tigrayans. So now those calamities are, the international community cannot tolerate seeing that abuse going on, and then don't push for any settlement. So is it expected that the international community support Abiy for continuing unwinnable war? Or is it to tell him to stop the course and then come to the negotiating table, which was basically what he should have done in the first place, regardless of any actions taken, even by TPLF. Extra miles need to be taken to avoid war, because the country has been through many wars, internal and international, including with Eritrea in 1998 to 2000. And that caused a lot of, damages. That caused a lot of damages to the country's resources, both human and material. Look at now, the destruction happened in Tigray, rebuilding that economy. If you consider the cost of war, that's a typical example where you go to war, you destroy the economy of a region, and now you also spend resources to rebuild it, because it has to be rebuilt in one way or another. In the meantime, until such rebuilding happens, victims are suffering. Hunger is, the critical problem in the area. Loss of life, for many reasons, whether it's through hunger or through killings, extrajudicial killings, and so that's one thing. The other thing is, because it went into war, in Tigray, that basically destroyed the capabilities of Ethiopian armed forces. Now conflicts are, erupting all over the place. So what is the current situation of the country now? If you just ask anyone, be it in that country or outside, nobody would tell you, Ethiopia is in good situation. No, it's a very dire situation. It's a very disastrous situation. And to undermine this and then act as if nothing is happening and blaming international community who suggests and urges government to do the right thing is, I think, naive. So I think the push, by some interest groups in Ethiopia to urge Abiy to resist the call by international community for peaceful settlement would also be a failure again, because that's not sustainable. That's not lead to any solution. Because of what was done in the country, mainly the human rights abuses, Abiy lost credibility as a leader. Nobody will listen to him now. The only friend left, even in the Horn of Africa, for him to talk to is the Eritrean dictator. And this dictator is a dictator for his country, but is spilling over into the neighboring country and now destabilizing. So since Abiy started working with the Eritrean government, Ethiopia went into kind of dark age, meaning democratization was the hope of the reform, but contrary to that was what happened. He lost his main constituents. He started by losing his main constituents, the Oromo people, on the shoulder of whom he came to the power. But not only, it's very funny now, and not only the Oromo people, the constituents, the main constituents, but he also started losing the Amhara people. All the protests that happened the last couple of weeks is testament to his loss of credibility. And his party is in disarray. There is infighting between party actors. I don't think they pretend they are one and strong, but our understanding is the opposite. And knowing that the party is in disarray and expecting this party to lead the country to a peaceful transition to democracy is also a naive expectation. On top of this, is planning, these unrealistic elections. We'll talk about that in the next episode, perhaps. Is also undermining the dire situation the country is in. So when, peace and stability is a key lacking element in the country, elections become now a luxury, and human life need to be given priority, but that's not what's happening, and it's very sad situation, and I would say.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And Professor Mohammed, so as Dr. Hussein stated, Abiy is losing popularity. There is huge condemnation to his entire administration. How does this affect his government, and how is the Ethiopian media and the government media surrogates that are calling on Abiy to resist the imperialist conspiracy, how does this affect the current state of Ethiopia at the moment?
Thank you, Milko. Professor Abbas and Dr. Hussein have answered that question very well, but I'll just add a few points. But the first point I would add is Abiy Ahmed was the darling of the West. It's the same West that he is accusing now of bias that awarded him the Nobel Prize. So when they awarded him the Nobel Prize, they were good. Now when they criticize him, they are all of a sudden bad. So both of them cannot be true at the same time. That's one. Two, the reaction to his government from the international community is a reflection of what is happening at home, in my belief. So what's going on at home? Let's talk about his popularity at home, which is really what matters. So Abiy Ahmed had a huge constituency, as Dr. Hussein said, the Oromo people, that brought him to power. But in his first speech as Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Dr. Abiy hailed Emperor Menelik as a hero. To remind our audience, Emperor Menelik waged a war of subjugation against the Oromo people, in which thousands were massacred. So he lost the Oromo people that very day. Now, he had conditional support from the Amhara elite and opinion makers. Their support was conditional. Now, he is losing them as well. So his support is really waning. He has no constituency left. So Abiy is manipulated by very few people around him. I think it's fair to say the reason he is making mistake after mistake is because he does not have really good advice from people surrounding him, and they're telling him to do things that does not benefit the country. So we can mention names here. And these are people who have on record biased views against the Oromo people, against other religions, and so on and so forth. But yet he's surrounded by these people. They are his advisors. So he is lurking from one mistake to another, and it's a sad situation. So Abiy is trying to externalize his failure at home and his media surrogates, reminiscent of the Derg regime. Now they're calling America the imperialist because they want to blame his failures on the boogeyman, somebody else. So if he was popular at home, that would have some credence. But he is not popular at home. And what the international community is doing is simply a reflection of that. There is massacre in Tigray. He has admitted to that. It's not just an allegation. And the international community is saying a massacre happened in Tigray and you need to stop the war in Tigray. And for that, he is calling them biased and trying to resurrect TPLF from the dead. I don't think that would fly. Now, to a larger picture of Abiy's predicament at home, okay? Now, what he should do is, regardless of the public opinion at home or the opinion of the international community, Abiy Ahmed needs, in my opinion, to do certain things. And the first thing he should do is get rid of his advisors, because they have given him bad advice. The war in Tigray is a direct consequence of this bad advice. He should replace them with people who can give him good advice. 1, 2, he has to dump Isaias Afwerki of Eritrea. Isaias rules Eritrea without any constitution, and he should not take advice from someone who has a personal vendetta against a group in Ethiopia. And he has his troops at least have committed massacre and targeted killings and rapes and so on and so forth. So Abiy Ahmed needs to do those things. If he does that and takes good advice from other people, he might, I underline might, turn his fortunes around. Otherwise, Abiy Ahmed is going down the drains.
Thank you so much. And back to you, Professor Abbas. So, as you have all stated, he has been losing support even among his own constituents. There were mass protests in the Amhara region. Sudan has occupied land in Western Gondar. The asymmetric war in Tigray has continued. There are claims of politically motivated killings in many parts of the country. Can elections conducted under these circumstances be considered legitimate? Not to mention that there are also a lot of prominent political figures that are in jail right now. What is your take on this?
Thank you. Just let me add a couple of points to excellent points both Dr. Hussein and Professor Mohammed just made. One of the basic problems of Abiy is he doesn't know the basics of diplomacy. He didn't learn how to simply conduct foreign policy. One of the worst things I think demonstrated when he went to Cairo, met Egyptian president and say, Wallahi, billah, I will not reduce your water. That you don't say that. This is really a critical security issue. And he promised them in the public, Allah billah. He said, in Islam, that is important. Wallahi billah means it's simply, you simply take an oath in the name of God. You don't do that in a kind of rational world. The other issue, I think also, he is very confused guy. I don't know if you saw the kind of message he simply posted yesterday. He is sort of religious mystic. He tends to compare himself as a sort of with Christ's resurrection. He is now criticized, he is seen badly, and then he will be, of course, vindicated. It's a kind of mystic. So what we want to see is not a childish way of thinking about religion, Middle Age, politics of 2,000 years ago. We need a leader who is rational bureaucracy. I think Abiy doesn't know that legitimacy comes from three sources. One is, of course, rationality, rational bureaucracy, election from the people, which we'll be discussing. The second one is, of course, charisma. Abiy doesn't have one, although he tended to simply show that he has that charisma. The third one is, of course, the most important traditional one. Abiy doesn't have any of three. So I think when it comes to election, I want to just add one important point. Abiy simply was endowed with really rich resources, who are Oromo people, 40 million, 45 million. Also, all Oromos may not necessarily vote for him. If he bases himself, his power on Oromos, he is guaranteed. Still, of course, he can steal the election by claiming on behalf of the Oromo people. So what he did was, of course, he simply has recourse to sort of what you call self-abnegation. He wanted to distance himself from the Amaras. This identity politics. He felt that by allying with Amara, by simply undermining his Oromo roots, he would be favored by the Amaras. But you see, you are punished sometimes by history. Now, if you see what happened a week ago or 2 weeks ago in Amara region, he was simply the one who was the most despised. And even some demonstrators were threatening him, of course, to kill him and to do what people did to Gaddafi and what people did to Saddam Hussein, which simply means a humiliation for someone who simply abandoned his social base. Now you know his social base is what? Someone who doesn't have even a social base or constituency, which is Burhanu Nagga. Burhanu Nagga, Azema, who is simply making declaration on his behalf to the point where he is saying the Eritrean government must not be withdrawing from Tigray. So that means Abiy doesn't really have any social consistency, but at the same time, as you said, Ethiopia is really, no matter from which perspective you look at, there is no way that you can organize election in Ethiopia. As you mentioned, Ethiopia, one of the things I think we forgot, we mentioned is, although is trying to wage war in Tigray, the Ethiopian people, while of course Sudan's government apparently occupied 70 kilometers in Ethiopian interland, the land which is allegedly belonging to Ethiopia. One of the strangest things you can see in history is Abiy should have invited Eritreans to defend that Ethiopian border instead of simply bringing Eritreans to come in and rape Tigrayan women and, of course, stealing the resources. So that's one of the strangest things you can see. Regardless of how you look at, of course, Abiy doesn't have any way of simply organizing an election, because in order for election to take place, the country has to be politically stable. There is no stability. There is war everywhere. There is confrontation, someone dying. Most of the country is simply under command post, Wolaga, Guji, Borana, and of course Tigray. So where you organize? Abiy himself, of course, contradicting as always, he dividing Ethiopia into three zones. He said green zone, yellow zone, and red zone. So when the country is split into zone, how on earth you can organize free and legitimate and credible election? You can't. So the second important issue I think you look at is simply Abiy undermined, arrested, marginalized legitimate political opposition, especially in Oromia region. You see, these people were invited to depose arms and for, of course, diaspora to come in and to compete by democratic means. They are all in jail. So in Oromia now, which is, of course, the richest, naturally the richest, of course, vote, simply he wanted to simply win alone by competing against himself. 178, apparently he calculated to put in the parliament. So when you look at, of course, the whole Ethiopian regions, Ethiopian panorama, what we call democratic election cannot happen. And so there is no way that you can simply organize any kind of election under these conditions. That's why I think the international community, especially the newly appointed American ambassador to the region, clearly says you cannot organize election under this condition. That means this election cannot be recognized, cannot be accepted by any reasonable person. This person, of course, wanted to rule. I think one of the problems of Abiy was because he was trying to become a king. Now he invented a new strategy which was abandoned in Africa, what you call personal rule. You know what was happening in African politics, as you know, since 1960 to 1990s, strong individuals simply creating artificial institutions, winning election, and they simply ruling personally. This is called personal rule. So now Abiy doesn't want to compete with anybody. He wanted to become personal rule. Unfortunately for him, now the international community has mobilized against stealing election. Now not stealing, because he is simply pressuring people, sometimes, of course, by giving them, of course, sugar. You know how miserable this country is. So some people have to vote for him because they need to get sugar, or they need to get something, oil, for example, which is simply unexpensive. So what he is trying to do is simply childish. No one really buys this kind of election. Election cannot be democratic and cannot be organized in this way. So that's why, of course, the international community, before you do everything else, you need to look at a way of creating a meaningful dialogue, a meaningful, inclusive dialogue, a way forward, which simply means abandoning this masquerade of election, which doesn't serve any purpose, which may create more problems. By the way, bad elections are likely to lead to more violence, more displacement, rather than. So I think you would be better off not organizing any election, because now, at least at this time, he can say, I was selected by the party which was ruling party, which was not legitimate. Now, if he wins tomorrow under this condition, who believes that Abiy won a free and fair election? No one. So that's why I think the international community are focusing mostly to first ending the conflict in Tigray, and then creating, of course, a mechanism where he can bring together all stakeholders. Of course, he has to free the leaders, opposition leaders in jail, and also all parties, all civil society organizations, religious organizations, everybody who is concerned, to simply trace a path for the future. So I think that is simply why many people do not necessarily believe Ethiopia can organize election under this condition. It never had, and this cannot simply lead to any positive results.
Thank you so much. That's an important take. Dr. Hussein, to you as well. Ethiopia is currently in a horrible political climate. As stated, there is war crimes going on. There are extrajudicial killings. There are mass imprisonments. How can an election, if so, be legitimate under these conditions, in your take?
Yeah, thank you, Mirko. I think Professor Abbas rightly put it. The election cannot be held under current circumstance. There are a lot of ongoing killings, displacements, imprisonments, disappearances of people, and there's lack of stability and peace. As we mentioned earlier, election has phases. So first, what is the process? What's the process leading to election? How is election conducted? How are the participants, treated? Is it fair? Was it representative? Is it peaceful? Was the enabling environment in place, such as the rule of law, protection for candidates, protection for political party officials, their offices, and so on. And we know that, and the electoral board, openly admitted that even the ruling party and the government is not playing its due role in facilitating election. Offices were closed by incumbent party officials. People are treated badly. Offices are not, the offices of the political parties in many places, particularly in Oromia, were closed for no reason. And political party leaders are in prison. And political party members and supporters are jailed for nothing. And we know that this is rampant situation that is clear to everybody. It's not an exaggeration. It is a daily, event. And so when, for example, when it comes to election, you need to have a choice. So, look at the Oromo people. Who are the choice of the Oromo people now? Which parties are, parties are alternative parties from which the Oromo people would elect, would choose? No. There is only one party, that's the Prosperity Party. The rest, I think they're, I don't think they have even a place in Oromia because they don't, they don't promote any aspiration of the Oromo people. And for them, it's an outright rejection, is what my expectation. And the Prosperity Party would win anyway in Oromia. But is it presenting itself as an alternative, a good alternative to the Oromo people when it is already in power, is now killing people and doing all sorts of human rights abuses? I don't think it would be a choice for the Oromo people if other choice was there. But the Prosperity Party made it sure that it eliminated all all competing parties which are palatable to to the Oromo people, and it's Prime Minister Abiy spoke about how he himself even tried his best to ask people, all political organizations to take part in elections, when in fact his party members are the ones jailing and mistreating members and leaders of these genuine political parties, such as the OFC and OLF. And so the Oromo people don't have choice. Just urge it to now elect the Prosperity Party. You can see this from one signal: voter registration. Like, it became an issue, a problem, when there was not enough voter registration, and now we are hearing from sources in the country that voter registration cards are distributed attached to some other services, such as sugar and oil, products. What is this then? Don't we know this from before? We know this from before. We lived this history. So why is this history is repeating itself? The country didn't make any breakthrough from this bad history, and therefore I don't think there is any trust by people for this election. I don't think it also will lead to peace and stability. International community has already signaled that it will not recognize this election as fair and fair election, and no election observant is going to be coming to the country to even witness this. So it's a complete rejection of whatever the incumbent government is doing. So it's a waste of resources. Conducting election needs a lot of resources, and that's a waste of resources when the country can use that resource for infrastructure development and so on. So the process wasn't trustable, and the outcome wouldn't be different. And I don't think election would lead to any peaceful transition to any democracy. And Prime Minister Abiy is characterizing this as a groundbreaking election, even if even if they lose the election. Of course, they know they will not lose this election because they are the only players in the market, and so it's a joke. It's a kind of what people call sham election, and they cannot convince international community when they cannot convince all their constituents in the country, and that's what I would say, Milko.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for your take. Professor Mohammed, I pose the same question to you. As both the guests have mentioned, it is horrible political climate at the moment. He is losing credibility. Is there a chance that this could be a credible or legitimate election?
Thank you, Milko. My colleagues have answered the question really, really well. But I'll answer the latter part of your question first. Can they turn this around, make it a legitimate election? I guess there is still a chance, but it's very unlikely. But let me mention some points that are not mentioned, which is democracy needs Democrats, meaning the guy at the top has to believe in democracy, which means you have to give the people the chance to elect their leaders. And you have to be ready to relinquish power if you lose the election. Now, if like, as Dr. Hussein and Professor Abbas said, if you're using elections just as a cover, as a pretext to remain in power, then the whole exercise is a big waste of time and money. And I'm afraid that's what we're seeing in Ethiopia now. They extended voter registration deadline, and the reports we're getting is not a lot of people are registered, even with the extension of the deadline. They are coercing people, intimidating people to register to vote, but the people have resisted. And the reason for that is with election, if you don't believe your vote can matter, then you would not vote. It's really a simple calculus. It seems like the election in Ethiopia, just as elections before, it's predetermined. We know who the winner is. Then the people, I think, are saying, if you know who is going to win the election, why bother even vote? It's just a waste of time. And it seems like people are doing just that. Now, to just add some points that are raised by my colleagues, election is a process. It's not just voting on election day. Now, opposition supporters are harassed, they are intimidated, they are jailed, even killed. That's one. Two, there is no freedom to campaign. So in a national election, you have to travel and campaign in all corners of the country. Now you can't do that unless you are member of the ruling party. The third point is the election board is not neutral. We see them siding with the ruling party with their decisions. Now, especially in Oromia, okay, prominent election politicians are in prison, Jawar, Bakala, and the rest. Now, how can you hold elections without a real choice of candidates? There is no real choice. So this is Bilsagina and Abiy Ahmed running unopposed. So it's not really an election. It's Abiy trying to get legitimacy using the pretext of an elected government. Now, will this lead to any kind of stability in the country? I'm afraid not. It might even lead to more trouble for the government of Abiy Ahmed, because he has put all of his eggs in one basket, and he has resisted international pressure to talk to opposition leaders, to release jailed opposition leaders, and also talk to the TPLF. Now what we hear from the government's media surrogates is that Abiy Ahmed should not negotiate with TPLF, should not release opposition leaders, and so on and so forth. This is, like I said earlier, reminiscent of what the Derg government used to say. They had slogans blaming America for all of their troubles. Abiy seems to be headed that way, sadly. And I think they have to look inward. It's not America or the European Union. It's really what they're doing at home that is denying them popular support from the people. Now, Jeffrey Feltman, the American representative, will be traveling to Ethiopia in the coming days. The American government has made its stance very clear. They want a negotiated settlement to the conflict in Tigray. They want elections postponed So because you need stability to conduct elections. If you don't have stability, you cannot conduct elections, at least legitimate elections. So I don't know what they intend to do, because they rely on the West for support, including budget support, and now they have decided to say no to the demands of the American government. Now, why is the American government insisting on Abiy Ahmed negotiating with the opposition? Is it some kind of conspiracy? I don't believe so. I don't think there is any kind of conspiracy from the West to unseat Abiy Ahmed. Like I said earlier, they supported Abiy Ahmed when he came to power. They awarded him the Nobel Peace Prize. So it's not really the West, it's what Abiy is doing to himself. And Abiy has to look inward again. He has to look at his policies. He has to look at the war in Tigray and the massacre that is perpetrated by Eritrean troops and also Ethiopian troops with the help of the Amhara militia. So Abiy has himself to blame. And to conclude, the elections cannot take place. If they do, Abiy is running unopposed. It's a sham election, and it's not going to move anyone's opinion. It's not going to change anything on the ground.
Thank you so much for your take. So last question, certainly not least, Professor Abbas, if the government does decide to move forward despite the calls from the international community, what would you advise the Ethiopian people to do at this time?
I think both the explanations from Professor Muhammad and those have made it abundantly clear. There cannot be any chance for election to take place. One of the problems, I think, Abiy lives in the world of fantasy, out of time. You know, no one really wants to buy against the international community to steal election in a nation of 113 million people. Imagine by eliminating, for example, how can you explain, as Professor Muhammad mentioned, by arresting, for example, Jawar Muhammad, Bakale Garba, and other OLF leaders? How can you really simply claim you can win an election in Oromia? That's a shame. And that simply must be intelligent enough to recognize that doesn't make sense. The second thing is, of course, so Europeans, who are really the main funder of Ethiopia, said they will not go to the election unless the situation evolves, which simply means Abiy first has to accept simply finding a solution for war in Tigray, which is really an important issue for Europeans. So the other issue, I think, for the Oromos and for many people, they must be able to say no if conditions are not right, because people have the right to vote or the right not to vote. So they know that the people they love, the people may be voting for, are not there. Also, if Abiy wins clearly and squarely in a competitive election, that is fine. But by putting someone in jail, how on earth you simply can convince Oromo people to come out and vote for you? So the people who are going to represent the Oromos are Bilsiginas. These are really called politicians of the Bali. I know that it's legitimate for their part, of course, to feed their children, but not this way. So they are not representing the vested interests of their people, and therefore, why do you send these irresponsible individuals who are there simply to serve Abiy's personal interest? That may include, by the way, if Abiy wins, he may have recourse to changes the constitution. For the moment, I think they are saying basically we may keep some form of federalism, but if he gets the majority, as he will, I think there is a possibility that he changes the constitution. There is a possibility also he can restore the old empire, the old unitary state, by allying with some Amara elements, and of course Azema, who doesn't have consistency, which want to have some influence. So that's why I think the Oromo should not simply be hanging themselves knowingly. If they are forced with the gun, I think simply don't go and vote. But then under normal condition, in all conscience, they shouldn't be participating in this election, because it's not right, it's not fair. So for Abiy, I think if it makes sense for him, just release these politicians. Even if they do not win let them compete, let them be there, let people see them. And otherwise, I think you cannot simply do that. And the Oromo people should know better, and they should not be voting. If they have to vote, then the political space has to be free and fair. That will not be the case. I don't think that anyone will be electing. So I advise also European governments, American government, Western government, not to send a single election observers, because there is not election. That's not an election. It's not competition election, because the condition has not been met, and so there should not be any observer from outside. There should not be a penny for this election. Let Abiy simply do what he wants to do, but of course he will not necessarily be recognized as legitimate elected leader. So rather someone who stole election, who may be weaker than the current situation. I think that's what I want to say. So I call upon Oromos, if you have the means, avoid it. Don't participate. That's simply all I want to say. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your take. And Dr. Hussein, same question I posed to you. If this moves forward, what would you advise the Ethiopian people to do?
Well, the election, I don't know, will it move forward? Given the current situation, I doubt it. But if it moves forward, one thing is clear. Participation by the Oromo people doesn't make any change, because we know the outcome. The Prosperity Party made it clear that no reliable, competent party is competing with them. The parties such as Izema and the like are in their contrast. So if the Oromo people are presented with the option of electing the Prosperity Party against the other, of course they will go for Prosperity Party. Why? At least there is some element of their discussion that hints that they wanted to continue the federal system. But the others clearly said they don't even recognize the constitution. They work against the constitution. They will revise the constitution and undo all the gains that the Oromo people had the last 30 years, and no Oromo would support that. And another thing that I would just to mention is there was this Izema party was the leader was heard to say that if they were elected, they will abandon, let's say, for example, the Islamic banking. And that completely is against the interest of the Oromo people, particularly the Oromo people, not only the Oromo people, all the Muslims. And there was a leaked document that we saw was written by these Izema people. And that is really threatening to the majority. And so my advice to all Muslims, including the Oromos, is to reject Izema, because Izema has shown clearly that it's not even supporting the basic fundamental right of human being to have access to finance of their own preference. And so they made sure that the Oromo people would not elect Izema. They are presented with Prosperity Party, so they would elect Prosperity Party. So the Prosperity Party might be elected, but we know what they are doing. So the Oromo people need to just continue fighting for its right in all shape and form. Strengthen its unity, because the unity of the Oromo people is a critical ingredient in its future. And internationally, I think the Oromo people should continue for enhancing its advocacy globally. For example, what OLA is doing is a credible step. For example, if you look at the letter the American senators, 5 of them, I think, sent to the Horn of Africa envoy of the United States, Ambassador Jeffrey Feldman, that reflects that OLA has contributed to the awareness of, the Americans in terms of the situation in Ethiopia. We know that the war in Tigray was the main focus, but equally important is the stabilities, the instability and lack of peace in the rest of the country, particularly what happened in Wello, what happened to Wello Oromos, and then what's going on in Oromia in general needs, global attention. And I think OLA did a very good job in terms of bringing that to the attention of the American government. And I think the Oromo people should continue doing so. Achieving some diplomatic goals is not, it's not a short-term process. It has to be a long-term engagement. And all Oromos in the diaspora, we have to do whatever we can to speak for the rights of our people in Ethiopia, not only for the Oromo people, but all nations and nationalities in Ethiopia. And the federal system seems to be under threat, and I think we need to be defending that. Ethiopia went through, ups and downs in the past. When we saw that this federal system would recognize, and you can make it better by amending some of the loopholes in the federal constitution, but denying it and ignoring what it achieved is complete. It's a complete aspiration to return back to the dark ages where the country went through, and the Oromo people need to continue its fight. Mind you, it's the Oromo community, the Oromo youth that brought this change. 3 years ago, when the TPLF was at the highest, diplomatic, military, and economic and political space. So given where Abiy government is, it's not a big challenge for the Oromo people to gain its rightful position in the country. So I would say continue the fight, and it may take some time, but we'll have to continue the fight. Thank you.
Thank you so much for your take. Professor Mohammed, lastly to you, same question I posed to you. If the government does decide to move forward despite condemnation from the international community, what would you advise the people back home to do?
Thank you, Milko. Professor Abbas and Dr. Hussein have answered that. I agree with them. Especially in Oromia, they have no other choice. So they should refrain from registering and voting, because if they do that, they may play into this scheme that Abiy Ahmed and his party are running, which is to use elections and create an appearance of democracy in Ethiopia. They should deny them that. But I want to look at this from a different perspective, and which is in economics, we have a model. It's called the median voter model. So in essence, politicians, if they are elected by the people, are the proxies of the people when spending money on public goods. So what do politicians do for the most part? It's spending money. So everybody cannot debate a bill every day and spend money. So we send our proxies to the capital of Oromia and then the federal capital which is Addis Ababa or Finfinne, to spend money on our behalf. Now, the problem is they are resisting to relinquish this monopoly on power, because if you have legitimate elections for the first time in the short history of that country, 150 years as we know it, you would have a government of the people, for the people. And they don't want that to happen. The main reason, in my opinion, that they don't want the government of the people to be created is the issue of natural resources, especially land. So they don't want the Oromo people to control their own destiny. And right now, the issue of land is a hot button issue in Ethiopia. There is a widespread corruption when it comes to the use of land. They buy land from farmers for a very small amount of money, and then they turn around and sell that land to investors and real estate developers for a lot of money. So elections and denying the Oromo people and the people of Ethiopia, for the first time, the opportunity and the chance to elect their own government means, sadly, again in 2021, the Oromo people and all peoples of Ethiopia will not be masters of their own destiny. It's somebody else controlling our destiny. So Abiy Ahmed is denying us that opportunity. Now I call on the European Union, as Professor Abbas said, and the American government, one, not to send observers to Ethiopia because this is not really an election. This is a pretext. Two, not to fund the government. The government of Ethiopia is broke. They don't have money. They can't pay salaries. They don't have foreign currency. Their reserve deposits are waning. Reports coming from the banks, especially the Central Bank of Ethiopia, the National Bank, is that they don't have the dollar, they don't have the euro. They are really broke, and goods that they import from other countries like food items, oil, sugar, medications, they are in short supply. We don't want people to hurt, but it's Abiy Ahmed's fault. And this guy, we are at the 11th hour. He can turn this around. There is a slim possibility, very slim. So he can turn this around if he wants. The election is really a sham. I don't know if it's going to happen. I'm very doubtful. If it does, it's a sham election to legitimize a dictator, Abiy Ahmed, as a legitimate prime minister of Ethiopia. So I have really very low expectations for the success of this election. It's a sham election, as we said repeatedly. And Abiy Ahmed is denying the people of Ethiopia, not just the Oromo, to control their own destiny. It's sad, after all of that sacrifice, the people may have to come out to the streets to protest this government, just as well as they did the previous government. Let's hope for the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I would like to thank all three of our guests today for joining us, Professor Abbas Namo, Dr. Hussein Hamda, and Professor Mohammed Tahiro, for taking the time to discuss the current climate in Ethiopia. I am your guest, Milko Badasso. Thank you for tuning in to Walabo Broadcasting Corporation, and I hope you tune in next time as well. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Milko.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.